Hello everyone, welcome to the studio. Karen Margulis here. Do you ever freeze in front of a blank piece of paper? Do you ever wonder, how do I begin this painting? I'm not sure what to do to start this painting. That fear, I know it well, but I've got a solution for you. I've got a very easy way to start a pastel painting that will take away your fear of starting a new painting forever. Alright, I've got a lot to cover in this video, so come on, let's get started. Alright, so what is the solution? How do we approach this empty piece of paper without fear? Well, we need a simple underpainting approach, a simple block-in, something that works every time without overthinking, right? We don't want to overthink the painting. So I have a very simple way I like to depend on starting a painting when I'm just not sure where to begin. When I don't know what kind of underpainting I want to do, I begin with a dry wash underpainting using some hard pastels. So what I want to do is dive right into the demo today, show you step by step how I start the painting, work through the painting, and of course how I'll finish. Alright, so come on closer to the easel and we will get started with it. Alright, here's our reference photo for today. I'm going to do a beautiful marsh scene, sunset over the marsh, just very soft and subtle. And what is the story behind this? It's just the beautiful late afternoon light, the sunlight on the marsh just kind of filtering down into the foreground grasses. So it's really this play of warm color against cool color. How do I start this? I have this empty piece of paper. Remember, we don't want to be afraid of it. So I first do a very simple line drawing, and I decide to I'm going on a horizontal or landscape format, but my photo is portrait, so I have to stretch it out a little bit. And I also decide to raise the horizon so I can really play with the grasses. The sky doesn't have much interest in it, it's just beautiful color, so I don't really need to show a whole lot of the sky. Alright, that's great, but how do I begin? How do I know what colors to use to block in, and what approach do I take? So the dry wash, that's where that comes in. What is it? I'm going to simply take some pastels, hard pastels, so not super soft, just hard, and I'm using Nupastels and Rembrandt. And I'm going to go with warm colors and cool colors. So I'm going to put warm colors where the sunlight is hitting, and cooler colors where it's more in the shadows. So have a look at the pastels that I'm using for today. I've got some cool colors, some blues and purple, some warmer yellows and oranges and reds. And then once I start painting, I'm going to be using this set of Terry Ludwig pastels. This happens to be the Red Rock collection, but I'll talk about the colors as I use them. Alright, let's get started with this underpainting. The first thing we're going to do is do a very light layer all over the paper. That's the whole idea behind this method, is we're going to cover the entire paper. And I'm going to start with a dark blue in the trees. Put in some of these tree trunks to begin with, and then very lightly layer anywhere where I see the dark and the cool color. So all these trees and bushes are in the shadows for the most part. So I'm going to put those in a dark blue. And I'm going to pull it over to the edge. And now I'm going to make what I call a foundation pathway of dark. Kind of zigzagging my way across this meadow. Down here in the foreground, it's cool. It's in the shadows. So I'm going to take another blue pastel. This one's a little bit warmer, more of a turquoise. And anywhere where I see the shadows, where the land is in the shadows, I'm going to be painting it with these cooler colors. Let's add a little bit of purple in the middle. I do see a little bit of purple. Alright. Now, wherever I see the sunlight, I'm going to use warm colors. So I'm going to use a nice yellow orange right in that section. We have some sunlight filtering in and hitting some of the grasses in the foreground. So I'll just go ahead and put a few of those grasses in with some yellow and some orange. I'm going to add a little bit of orange to my background yellow. Where else is it warm? Well, up on the tree. So I'm going to use a little orange up on the upper portion of the trees is getting some of that warm sunlight. So I'm going to add a little bit of warm in that area. And where else is there warm? We have warm in the sky. So I'm going to use a little bit of that orange in the sky. I'm also going to add the yellow. Now this is actually going to be a much darker than I want it to be. I will tone it down once I start layering with the pastel. Alright, this is a cool color. Let's add a little bit of purple. So I have a whole layer of hard pastel on the entire piece of paper. I'm going to take this a step further. I'm going to use a piece of pipe insulation foam that I've just ripped into a small piece. And I'm going to blend in this entire first layer. I'm going to use this as a blending tool. It works really well as a blending tool because it doesn't get frayed by the sanded paper. Oh, by the way, I'm working on a piece of Uart sanded pastel paper. It is not mounted, but I don't have to worry about it buckling because I'm not going to be doing any wet underpainting. Remember, this is just dry. So it's a really good way to start a painting if you don't have mounted paper or if you're working on unsanded paper. Now I'm coming into the grasses and I'm blending in all of these foreground grasses, the warm and the cool. And what I am left with is a nice soft out of focus underpainting. So I no longer have to fear the paper because I have a roadmap to follow. I know where my darks are, I know where my warm colors are, I know what colors I'm having in the sky generally, and I have a really good start to the painting. So what I'm going to do now is move on to the hard pastel, or the softer pastel. So I'm going to take colors out of my box of pastels and I'm going to begin by reinforcing the darker areas. So I'm going to start with a dark burgundy color. I'm going to put in some of these spindly tree trunks. I'm not worried about them being exactly the way they are in the photo. The photo just kind of gives me a jump start. It gives me an idea, but I'm not worried about copying it exactly. Where else did I have dark? Well, remember I had the dark all the way into this foreground area. I like to have a nice dark, rich foreground, and then I'll build the grasses on top of that area. Alright, so that's one layer of dark. I'm going to add another layer of dark. This time I'm going to add a dark blue. I like to build my layers of color by thinking about what value I'm using, not always worrying so much about the color. It's more about getting the right value, especially when I'm building up layers of color in this early stages of the painting. So I've got a nice introduction of that cool color, nice cool dark blue for my foreground grasses that are in the shadow. Wait, let's go ahead and add another layer of dark. This time I'm going to add a warmer dark. This is a dark red, and I'm going to add it only to the tops of the trees, right where it's getting the sunlight, and just maybe right in this area here where it's catching some of the sunlight. Okay, so now I have, 3 layers of the dark, but that's really dark green. So I'm going to go ahead and add a dark green. This is a cooler green, this one. This is a blue green. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. And carry it down into the foreground. And then in the sunlit areas, I'm going to add another dark. This one's a little bit warmer. And then I have one that's even warmer, has more yellow green in it. I'm going to put that up at the top part of the tree. Where else? Maybe it's just it's catching a little bit of the light right down in here. Alright, notice everything is still very big, simple, not a lot of detail in the shapes. What I'm going to do now is address the sky. That sets the whole mood and tone of the painting, so I really want to put in the sky early on. And I have, the colors that I've used are a little bit darker than I want them to be. So I'm going to tone it down just a little bit and start with a peach color at the horizon and just pull it up a little bit further than I want it to be. I had a towel handy. I usually put my towel over my shoulder, and I forgot to do that, and that's just when I need it. So I'm starting off with a darker peach at the horizon, and I'm going to work my way up into the sky, making it gradually lighter, overlapping those areas so that I don't have a sky parfait. And I'm also using it to carve into the tree, to make the tree a little bit more airy. And I'm going to introduce a little bit of a pale yellow as well into the sky. I have that nice yellow that's in the underpainting, that block in. Remember, so that really gave me a head start on this painting. And it was just a really simple thing to do, just that dry wash. I use it whenever I'm just not quite sure, do I want to go with a wet underpainting? Do I want to get involved with waiting for things to dry? It's a great approach to use if you're doing plein air painting, the dry wash. And I'm just now carving into these trees just to really introduce some more of those sky holes. These pine trees are not very dense with foliage. All right. Now, I think I have enough information in the sky for now. I might have to come back to it and add a little bit more to it. But I'm going to work my way down, and I really want to get this wonderful orangey glow, sunset glow. But here's the thing. When we're painting a marsh, we have to make sure that the horizon, where the grasses meet the sky, is perfectly flat and level. Sometimes if I'm painting a very large area of marsh, I will actually measure so that I can make sure it's spot on. In this case, I'm just eyeballing it, but don't ever be afraid to take out your ruler and measure. Because if it's not perfectly straight and level, it will look like rolling land rather than marsh. And I'm just sneaking it back in here behind the trees because we know that it goes back behind these tree shapes. I like how it kind of comes in at an angle. I'm going to just kind of introduce a little bit of an angle there. I started with a darker orange, yellow orange, and then I used a lighter one. I'm going to introduce a little bit more of a dark one just to give a variety to this area so that it's not just all one color, just because grasses are rarely one color. All right, now I'm going to work my way forward. And starting in the distance, I've got those cooler, lighter green grasses. It can be a little bit darker there. And by using these cooler colors in these shadowed areas, it's going to help promote this feeling of warm sunlight. And I'm going to just sneak some of this cool green grass in and amongst the tree shapes. And soften the edges with my finger. I don't want there to be any hard edges because this is back in the distance. A little bit darker back in here. I'm going to keep working my way forward using a variety of greens and purples. I'm going to use horizontal bands in the very distant land, just as I did in these warmer grasses. And then as I come forward, I'm going to change the direction of my marks so that we see more of the front of the grasses. So when I get about maybe 3/4 of the way down. I really like this purple area of grass from the underpainting, so I'm going to leave it, but I also want to add a little bit more of the purple in there. The variety of color in the grasses really add interest to the whole painting. But the other thing that I need to do is I need to make sure that what's happening in the sky has something to do with what's happening on the ground. And so I need to start to think about what I'm going to do. How am I going to introduce some of those warmer grasses? Notice at this stage in the painting, I'm really only using the side of my pastel, and I'm not making any individual blades of grass or getting too fussy with my marks. That's going to change shortly. So I'm building from that roadmap that we established with that dry wash underpainting, and I'm gradually starting to add more and more in the way of detail. And in just a few minutes, I'm going to break out some other pastels so that I can introduce some more detail. I'm just going to add a little bit of a warmer green, so I see a little bit of yellow green. And notice at this point I have changed the direction of my marks so that they're going straight up and down rather than all horizontal, because now we can start to see what's happening with this foreground grasses. I'm going to actually blend in this bottom area a little bit more so we don't have the distraction of the paper color peeking through. Alright, I'm going to take a break and stand back because I'm to the point where I'm going to start to finalize and add detail and clarity, but I need to know exactly where I want to put those final marks. Alright, it's always good to take a break and step back from the painting. You get too on top of it and you don't see what needs to be adjusted. The other thing that I did was I took a minute to take the painting outside and spray it with some workable fixative, which darkened all of the darker areas, the trees and this foreground area, which will allow me to get more texture in the layering, and you'll see what happens with that in just a minute. But when I spray, I basically hold it about a foot or two away and just keep the can moving at all times, and that way you don't get puddles. If you get puddles of fixative, you've sprayed too much, and then it won't work the same way. So now I'm ready to move on, and I'm going to continue with a few more areas of what I call fat grass, using the side of the pastel stick, and then I'll come in and start to add more individual blades of grass. But I want to show you what happens when you put pastel on top of fixative. So here, let's take some of this green. And where the fixative was, I'm getting a really nice kind of textural effect. So like the dark areas stay in place, and then as I go on top of it with lighter areas, I'm going to add a little bit of blue to the grass. Remember, these are those cool grasses. And you can see the dark stays put. And I'm using a super light touch, just whispering that pastel on. And just introduce some of that cooler grass color. And then reintroducing some of that warmer grass color. I lost it a little bit when I added the fixative. There's also some of it right in this area. I'm looking at the photo just for ideas of how these just different bands of color in the grasses are working. Not necessarily to copy exactly what's happening, but just as ideas. I'm going to punch it up with an even warmer grass. And I'm noticing there's a little bit of gold or that yellow color that I have in the sky in the foreground, kind of working its way down into the grass. I don't want to get carried away and put it everywhere, because then it'll ruin the effect of this nice, cooler, shadowed area. So just in a few places. And I'm going to kick it up one more notch and add some of the distant field color that I put in, just to enhance that glow. Alright, the other thing I know that I need to adjust is add a little bit more clarity to the trees. There's nice big simple shapes, which is good, but now I'm going to start to refine them a little bit more. So I'm going to just add a little bit more in the way of light on the trees, but then also in the cooler areas I'm putting in some more of those blue-greens in those nice shadowed areas. There's a lot of blue in these trees that are in the shadow, so I think I might introduce a little bit more of the darker blue, just a hush of some of that blue right in there. Now I think I've got enough information that I can take out some of the hard pastels, and all I'm going to do is reintroduce the pastels that I used in the underpainting. So those hard pastels that we used to block in, remember that easy approach? Now I'm going to pull them back out, so I haven't put them away yet, and I'm going to use them to paint some of these upright grasses. I'm going to start with the bluer ones, those cooler ones that we began with, and I'm just kind of scribbling. Here's the darker blue that we used. Now we don't want to have a fence of grass, so I'm just kind of trying to create more in the way of scribbly, broken lines instead of really stiff, thick lines. So just kind of going back and forth. I like this one darker area in here. Kind of, the idea is leading the viewer's eye into the painting. And keep going with these cooler colors. I really like that violet that was in the underpainting, so I'm going to introduce a few more, but make some linear marks. So I'm just changing up my mark making. Everything up until this point was big, wide strokes, and now I'm getting involved with a little bit more detail in my mark making. Alright, now I need to come in and add some of those touches of warmth in the grasses. I'm going to start with a kind of a brownish color. Think about where I see some of the light filtering down into these grasses. Just a few in here. This is a darker one. This is not the most intense one. This yellow here is going to be the grasses that are really growing and catching some of the light. So I really want to push those in a little bit harder, but also make them very painterly. I don't want them to be stiff, so I'm just trying to roll the pastel so that I can get more of that, I'm going to introduce some orange, more of that broken line quality. I like how there's some of those grasses lit up all the way down into the foreground. Where else would we have some of the sunlit grasses? And I'll add some brighter orange in those areas. When I get to this stage of the painting, typically what I like to do is just make a few marks and then step back. Make a few marks and then step back. It's super easy to get carried away with your grass marks if you're not stepping back and analyzing where you're at. And you end up with too many, and if you have too many, you lose the impact. Alright, now I think I've got enough in the way of grasses. Let's go ahead and address what's happening in the trees. I just really want to refine some of the tree trunks. So I'm taking that dark blue that I used earlier, adding a few more hints of trunks up in the upper portions of the trees. I think this guy needs a little bit of a trunk. There's also some indications of some branches, it looks like dead or dried branches in some of these areas. So I'm taking that purple hard pastel, it's a Rembrandt, and I'm rolling it, rolling the top of the tip of it where it's hard or sharp, this edge, and rolling it so I can get kind of a nice broken line quality. Oops, I'm going to take a little bit of orange and add it to the edge of the tree trunk, because this tree trunk might be catching a little bit of that light. Same with up up here in this upper portion of this tree. In fact, I'm going to just add a little bit more orange. You can use a hard pastel over soft pastel. So a lot of times you think, oh, I'm only going to use the hard pastel in the beginning layers. But using hard pastels throughout the painting process works just fine. In fact, I find that hard pastels work really nicely as a blending tool. So for example, if I want to blend out the sky a little bit more, I can take that yellow that I used early on and I can blend these layers so I can get a smoother sky without actually using my fingers or a blending tool. And you get a really nice quality to your sky by using a harder pastel. Alright, so we are coming down to the finish line. I need to cover up some of those branches. Sometimes you get carried away. I put in a little too many and then they all felt like they were sitting on top. So I'm going to just put them down, cover them up with some foliage so they're not just sticking up on the top. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take out a set of Sennelier half sticks. These are super soft pastels. And these are wonderful for your finishing marks. So I want to go ahead and add some nice thicker marks of pastel in this painting so that I can have a little bit more contrast between thicker thicker marks and thinner marks. All right, so I'm going to take this golden yellow ochre color and use it in my distant field, and I'm pressing really hard. So up until this point I've been really using a light touch, but now I am pushing really hard and having that meadow or grassy area, rather marshy area, continue back behind the trees. I might even add just a poke of it back here and soften it, just to say, you know what, there's a whole layer out there. I need another color for the very top edge because it's kind of getting lost into the sky. So I'm going to go with a little bit of lighter, and remember, it has to be perfectly straight and level. So when you're at this stage, put your marks down with confidence, even if you don't feel confident. It really shows in your mark making. Just carry that light and keep some of those. I don't want worm shapes, but I do like that variety in the grasses. Okay, where else can I punch it up a little bit more? I think I can add a little bit more in the way of some leaf shapes. I don't want to paint every leaf or every pine needle in this case, but I do want to have a little bit more contrast. I like how some of that light is filtering down into the lower parts. Maybe just right up in here. I can add a little bit of that warm color down into the grasses. Where else? I like that purple. Do I have? Here's a really nice cool blue that I can just punch in a few more of those layers in the grasses. Working down into the shadowed area. The other thing I can do is add a little more punch to the grasses, so just a little bit maybe thicker marks. Grasses are, sometimes we've got little bits and pieces of things growing in the grasses, so just adding a little bit more variety to the grasses makes this foreground area a lot more interesting than if it were just straight lines. But again, I don't want to destroy the nice play of warm and cool, so just make a few of these marks and then step back. It's always about just a few and then stepping back. That will keep you from overdoing it. Adding just a little bit of a lighter. And I'm trying to think of ways to use these grasses to pull the viewer's eye into the painting, like from this foreground, moving through the grasses and making areas of interest along the way. So we've got this area, that's fine. We need to kind of direct the eye over into this area. So what I think I'm going to do is just make some thicker marks of that purple, just to showcase it a little bit more. So like we have something interesting over here, And then we get back into the trees, and we have some interesting things with the negative spaces between the tree trunks. And the light that's filtering through. So let's just enhance that by adding a little bit more dark. And I'm stepping back. I think I need a little bit more in the way of some other green stuff, just to make layers. I don't want the green stuff to look flat, but I don't want it to be carried away with too many different marks. And then we're getting to the finish. I like this little bit of brighter green area just to separate our distant meadow or distant marsh grasses. And I like this color. I'll put a little bit more of it over in there. Stepping back once again just to evaluate things. By the way, this part of the painting process, a lot of times when I make a video, I stop at this point, and because I need to give the painting a break, but I know you guys like to see how I go through the finish. So the finish part can be boring because it's just, you know, taking one step at a time and working through it. So what I'm doing now is kind of simplifying that peachy color, just toning it down just a tad by adding some yellow on top of it. Introducing a little bit more sky holes. I like that color that was there, but I think it needed to be toned down just a hair. So by adding a light layer of yellow on top, that does it. I'm going to now take out a bamboo skewer and use it in a couple of ways to make some darker grasses. So what I'm doing is revealing the darker blues that are underneath without painting individual blades of grass. I'm making more grass, but kind of just by revealing what's underneath, kind of simplifying some of this. It does get busy. You can also use this bamboo skewer if you need to straighten out your horizon or if you need to add a little bit more texture. I think the only other thing that I need to do in this area is just kind of give a little bit more of an interesting silhouette or shape to this tree. It needs a little bit more air in it. I think that's good. Alright, I think what I'm going to do is carry off a little bit more of the purple down in here. Just because we have it here, I want to do a little bit more purple, but it can't be the same exact purple. Let's make it a little bit darker. And just a few thicker marks of purple. What are they? It really doesn't matter. It's just adding some interesting things into the grassy area. Filter a little bit more of that light, a little bit heavier touch in there, and a little bit heavier touch over on this side. And a couple of blades of grass to pull us in to the painting on either side. And I think I'm going to stop. Well, always best to stop before you think you're done, because it's super easy to overwork a painting. It's a lot easier to stop, evaluate, and then if you need to come back, you can. Sometimes you need to take things away. You get a little carried away. Bamboo skewer works really well for that. Anyways, the idea for this demo for today is how to start without fear. I hope you've enjoyed that idea. That dry wash underpainting takes away the fear because it gives you one layer of pastel. It's a very simple way to start a painting, gives you a good roadmap, and it's a lot of fun. So I hope you've enjoyed today's demo. By the way, if you like what you see here today, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Share it with your friends. We are pastel ambassadors, and so if we can share and spread the wonderful world of pastel with everyone else, we're better for it. So help me out with that. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.